Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, or whenever you happen to be listening to this. Welcome to the Film Realist Podcast, the film and TV podcast from a complete nobody that is hopefully for somebody. I am recording this in the darkness of my own home because if you missed my social media post, I'm currently experiencing a blackout. So don't expect any fun clip for Monday morning because unfortunately, it's very possible that I won't likely be able to post that. And if I can get this on the internet when I would like to, hopefully you're listening to this during your regular scheduled Film Realist time on Monday morning. My name is Kyle Naranja. Welcome to the show. This will be episode 136, and on this week's episode of the show, I will be reviewing the complete season 3 of Reacher. And then to round out the show, we will do question of the week responses. As this is a whole TV show season review, it will only be filled with spoilers. Time codes will be listed in the description though if you haven't had a chance yet to watch the show, so there's no need to worry. Let's jump into Reacher season 3. Earlier in the year, I did give my thoughts on the first 4 episodes, and the setup for season 3 is so unlike the setup of the previous seasons, which was normally we have Reacher kind of just bumbling around the United States, going from town to town, and crazy things happen. And some of the framework for this season is a part of that, but I like that from the get-go, this season throws you into the deep end with an experience you're completely unaware of, the chaos that is happening around Jack Reacher, which seemingly seems similar to the experiences he's had in the 2 previous seasons, and then we get to see the unraveling of no, he's actually an inside man trying to lure out any information and find out more about this bizarre carpet company, which the assumption for the whole season is that it has to do with drugs. But the reason he wants to be involved is because he believes that Xavier Quinn, I believe is his name. Now, I would love to check that out, but I currently don't have any data whatsoever. So hopefully I'm right with his name. But somebody who he is familiar with from his past, and that's the motivation for Reacher. And what this season does so successfully is, for one, the momentum of having Jack, or Reacher, be in as the criminal informant working with the DEA is an experience we were not familiar with to him. We're so used to Jack Reacher being this specific special investigator, the first season being about, of course, the investigation of his brother's murder, and then special investigators that he had worked with in the past having been killed off and finding out that the T-1000 from Terminator 2 Judgment Day was involved in some very shady arms dealing. This season, putting him in the action, quite literally as the informant, makes the dynamic of what Reacher experiences so much more of a subtlety, to which he can't just be the brawn breaking in, entering. I mean, he does some of that, of course, in this season, as you would typically get from an Alan Ritchson Reacher season. But the way that he has to infiltrate this organization, become a trusted member of the group, and then rise the ranks because he needs to be number 2 in order to allow himself the opportunity to have the freedom to which he could behave in which the way he wants, makes it really compelling. And I thought the first 4 episodes did really do that. Unfortunately, I was discussing the season with friends as it's wrapped up Thursday when the show did finish, that the middle of the season, I think, really does try to escalate the stakes as problem after problem after problem are happening, and in an instant we have to see the problem solving that Reacher is so familiar with. But part of what doesn't work in the escalation of the speed bumps or issues that they have to overcome is they seem to kind of dilute from the main focus of the season. That's not to say that they're bad, but the momentum through episodes 1 through 4 really did feel like the trajectory was going to go to a place that we hadn't seen at all from a Reacher season. And I really did like this season. We've clearly established what works really well for this show. That's clearly a funny, comedic partner. And then obviously we've been given now in an instant for 3 seasons of this show, a somewhat reluctant romantic lead. And I really liked Duffy as a character, more independent than likely we've seen from any of the female leads in this show in general. But I don't feel that they necessarily got across that they're only really using each other for their physical needs, as opposed to some sort of actual connection that we had gotten before with Roscoe, and I've now forgotten the name of Serinda Swan's character, but her character in season 2. I think the dynamics between them and Reacher were different, but somewhat shared in the same playground, where Duffy I really liked, but that kind of, even though it's carnal, and of course, people with eyes, this is the largest that Alan Ritchson has ever gotten as Reacher himself. He literally does look like absolute Batman, and I have something to say about that later. But that dynamic only sort of comes up from one instance when we see that Jack swam through that incredibly tumultuous water in order to get out and explore something later on after he's on Anthony Michael Hall's compound. And Anthony Michael Hall, as somebody who is trying to exude power and be in this position where he feels like everything is in control, when in actuality, it's not. And he has to be the middleman to somebody who is much, much worse than him, makes for a really interesting character to see from Anthony Michael Hall. I like seeing the duality of that performance where when we initially meet him, we think of him as this drug-dealing crime lord, weapon-selling guy. And then as the show goes on, we see that there's probably more to him that is similar to his son than we would initially have been suggested in the beginning of the season, where we see a lot more of that vulnerability. And I can understand why you would want an actor like Anthony Michael Hall, particularly to play that relationship with his younger son who had such a traumatic experience, and the relationships that have evolved because of that, with him being kidnapped the first time, and then the inciting incident for this season being a fake kidnapping that allowed Reacher to get into the organization. I like the investigation, but the mystery of this was not as interesting as seasons 1 and 2. I thought that season 3 had some of the best elements of the 3 shows, but some of the framework that I enjoy, the actual case, the detective element of his character, the special investigator that he quite literally is, or a retired version of the special investigator, we only really just don't know where Duffy's former CI is. That's really the mystery. What are they selling? We learn it's weapons. Where is this girl? And I understand from a character standpoint why it is certainly interesting for Duffy to feel so bad for having lost somebody in the field. But on the outset of that, Reacher's motivation is just to kill Xavier Quinn. It's not, I need to learn something about this. It's, I need an opportunity to which presents itself, and I can just kill this guy. That's it. He doesn't have something he's trying to learn or unfold. But on the complete opposite of that, what I appreciate that each season has done is we have continually learned more about Reacher's backstory to fill out his military history, and seeing where he came from in season 1, getting a lot of his, essentially, his origin story, and then season 2 being the establishment of the special investigators, cases they went on, building in that dynamic, seeing much more of the Neely relationship, which she's going to have her own spinoff. And I love Neely and her being the through line, but I have to say one of the things I was a little disappointed by was the Finley cameo in season 2 really did surprise me, and I loved seeing that connection to season 1, that without Neely, we don't have any connections to any of the other seasons so far. Or, sorry, not so far, in season 3, which I found to be a little bit disappointing. And for the most part, I think the season does really work. I was talking to Rob Keyes, friend of the show, about this, and he loves that this is the action genre of TV shows, and I really do think he's right. But some of those staples, and this is not to say I didn't like this show. I really liked this season of Reacher. It's got some of my favorite things the whole show has done. But starting to see what the staples are of this show is something I'm hoping that as we continue down the road with this, we know we're getting a season 4, that we start to see less of these things be as formulaic as they've been presented to us already 3 seasons in. That being more so as we build to the finale, there's a twist where turns out Anthony Michael Hall was set up and the deal is actually going to be happening at his mansion during his birthday party, and the whole thing around the birthday party where you need to give us a building so that way we can have a shootout. Now, of course, yes, we get the shootout in the junkyard, but then we also get an indoor shootout because that's what Reacher does in the final episode of each of the seasons. Now, season 2 had a helicopter thing, which was quite intense, but keeping it indoors makes it feel much smaller scale, and it also being a mansion as opposed to a warehouse, which it has been for the 2 previous seasons. Outside of that, it being a smaller building, the stakes just don't feel as big. And because somebody personally connected to Reacher is not in immediate danger, I think the heightened tension that you would get if it was somebody that Reacher directly cared about being in the line of danger or having something possibly bad happen to them would make it much more captivating. So that part wasn't necessarily great. And one of the things I'm sure people are going to want me to talk about is the Paulie versus Reacher fight, which of course we've been building to the whole season. We see Paulie as this behemoth, and the fact that he makes Alan Ritchson look small is a dynamic unlike anything he's probably experienced in his life, likely ever. And I addressed that in episodes 1 and 4, but the continual back and forth between the two of them, Paulie obviously having the exact same instance that Reacher has had, except in actuality, he's never seen anybody as big as him. And that character's menace that he carries around because of the immediate danger he poses for everybody makes him a very threatening main henchman. It's something that I would say is more akin to the Bond franchise having a iconic henchman. And we haven't really had that in terms of a physical capability from somebody who could take down Jack Reacher. We've had hench people, but they've always been kind of scrawny, weak guys where the likelihood of them actually taking down Reacher was next to impossible. And the fight between the two of them, and there has been a conversation a lot online, and of course I've seen it, about Alan Ritchson playing Batman. And what I find especially interesting about that conversation is it has happened more recently, and obviously Alan Ritchson, and he's talked about this publicly, he's gotten bigger with each season, but his actual physicality he has in Reacher Season 3 is much more akin to the absolute run of Batman that's currently running right now. If he was built more like Season 1 Reacher, that's probably much more of a Batman shape. It's very, very similar to, he's probably bigger, but more in line with Ben Affleck when he was just a brick house in Batman vs. Superman. And I like him a lot. This season of the show is Alan Ritchson's best performance, maybe ever. And I commend him for that. Having somebody he looked after, being a mentor for, becoming a victim to somebody they were investigating and trying to close a case on Xavier Cain, and that being his driving force, quite literally, for vengeance. And we have him say that line, that insight into his character and seeing him be vulnerable because he's so filled with anger and despair over the loss of one of his agents or investigators is a depth to Alan Ritchson that I would argue we haven't seen at any point until now. And I'm really grateful for this show's ability to give us an opportunity to continually see what this actor is capable of. I've been a longtime fan of Alan Ritchson's, and I'm super happy to see that he's had this opportunity to stretch his acting muscles, as well as his physical ones, quite literally. And to have that be wrapped around why he takes down Paulie, and the fight between the two of them being one quite literally of brawn and brawn, but thinking more to the Batman comparison, which is why I brought it up earlier, is that this is essentially Alan Ritchson's Batman versus Bane, where obviously Batman is one of the most physically capable superheroes in the DC universe, but when he is coming up against Bane, who, depending on the version you read or see in film or TV, is also usually a capable tactician. But in this instance, they go just much more for brawn versus brain, but Reacher does happen to have both. But in this version of the fight, Paulie has much more muscles, and I like the fight a lot. I think the pacing of it, just being Reacher getting thrown around like he weighs absolutely nothing, like a bag of flour, is quite comical. And to see the size of this man who is able to do these things is crazy. And I enjoyed a lot of the fight within the barn house, particularly with Reacher realizing, okay, I can't outmuscle this guy, so I'm going to try to use weapons, whether that be a rake or a hoe. And I like him trying to injure Paulie so that way he is able to physically overcome him. What I didn't need in the fight was the fighting in the toilet exterior water that is beyond the mansion near the lake or ocean that we see, because it just sort of adds a pause to the season. I really liked prior to that where they both get knocked out and we see Paulie tie him up and hang him with a metal chain, and I was really curious where we were going to go with that. I was so glad that the resolution was not Reacher breaking the chains, which would have been so fast and furious. It would have definitely taken me out of that moment, but instead he uses his brain and he pulls the bolts out of the rotting piece of wood. Much more of a problem solve than Deus Ex Machina moment, which I'm really grateful for. And after that, where we get them swirling through the water, and I thought for some reason he had likely broken Paulie's neck, but the fight continues, of course, to them fighting again with the giant machine gun, rail gun that's within Paulie's office. And Reacher does use his brain to overcome Paulie, where he jams the gun with a bullet, thus causing it to backfire into Paulie. I think it's a great death for Paulie. I don't necessarily know if it's as rewarding as you would expect from this fight scene. It's super cool to see the gun shooting all around, them trying not to get shot by it. But I don't know. It's a cool moment. I expected more from how they were building up that fight scene for the whole season. It's cool. It's just not as cool as I think Paulie maybe deserved as a death, or maybe undercutting his death with something less cool is kind of the statement on this show's character. I don't know. People, let me know what you think, if you thought that fight scene was great or wasn't. And then, of course, we get the roundup with, we have the Russians, we have Quinn, and then we have Team Reacher. Obviously, Duffy does save her previous CI, and we get sort of a standoff, a three-people standoff. I don't think you're supposed to say what was once called, so I'm not going to say that. And that's a cool moment. Again, seeing Neely use her brain in how to get out of that situation. It wind up being, it's a toy grenade. It was just sort of there in Anthony Michael Hall's office. Was a cool moment. And then Quinn gets killed, and the relief off, or not even relief, but I would say relief that Reacher has finally overcoming this obstacle when he thought he had killed Quinn already is a good moment. One of my favorite elements of this season finale, though, is Duffy being the one being like, hey, we needed each other for something. And that's all I was kind of interested in. So I don't want you to be all lovey-dovey about it. And I like that instance where we see Reacher being like, you literally took the words out of my mouth. Okay, I guess I don't have to be the bad guy in this situation. And it is cool to see the shoe on the other foot where a female character goes, no, man, I had needs. You had needs. We scratched each other's back to the end. Goodbye. And I like that. I think this show in general is wildly entertaining. If I were to rank the Reacher seasons, it definitely is still number one. That's probably because of how fresh it was in the Reacher representation when we had the 2 previous movies. And don't get me wrong, I love the first Jack Reacher, but Jack Reacher Never Go Back is absolutely terrible. So to continue that trend, I loved season 1 of Reacher, and I would probably go, you know what, I really don't know. I liked 2 quite a bit. I probably would, at this point now, you might have to ask me later because I have rewatched season 1. I haven't ever rewatched 2 and 3. But as of right now, the way I would rank Reacher seasons is I would say Reacher season 1, Reacher season 3, and then Reacher season 2. There's too many characters in Reacher season 2 for me. Reacher season 3 does have the ability of having a smaller cast, and I liked seeing Reacher be completely motivated by anger. It's not typically something we see from him. He's usually much more clinical and controlled, and I like seeing that aspect of this character. Let me know what you thought of Reacher Season 3 in the comments for this episode. I'm really curious. Have you watched the show all the way through? Did you happen to just watch one of these seasons and fall off? And are you looking forward to Season 4? And if you are a Reacher book reader, what book do you think we're going to get for Season 4? Please tell me, although that won't necessarily help because I've not read any of them, but I am really curious on what you have to say. Now let's jump into Question of the Week responses and listener mail.
Can I ask you a question? Just fun?
There's something I've been meaning to ask you.
I ask the questions, you answer the questions.
Why do you ask questions to which you already know the answers?
Did that count as a question?
Yes.
Damn it.
Last week's question of the week was what TV show had the best 3rd season? And man, did we get a bunch of different responses. Fortunately for me, I pulled them up already. Stephanie writes in, I can't believe this is my answer, but the CW's The 100. Obviously don't watch a lot of TV, or at least not a lot where the 3rd season is great, but season 3 had an interesting AI storyline. Too bad they killed off some beloved characters and went downhill from there. I didn't even finish the last season. It was so bad. I've not watched a second of The 100, but the last thing I would do is be overly critical of CW shows in general. I loved a lot of the Arrowverse, Smallville especially, and saying it now, it sounds kind of funny, but season 1 of Riverdale was absolutely incredible. It was like Twin Peaks, but in the Archie universe. So don't sleep on CW shows. So it shocked me initially, but definitely understand where you're coming from with that, Stephanie. Dylan writes in, recency bias, but because I've been rewatching it, I'll say Daredevil season 3 is the best season of the original show. I go back and forth so much between the 2 seasons, Dylan. I love season 1 and I love season 3. They are both so great. And it's interesting as the Daredevil Born Again episodes have been releasing. I had a conversation in my comic book store recently, and I think season 2 gets elevated because of how good 1 and 3 are. I don't think 2 is as good as people remember, but Dylan, let me know what you think because I know you rewatched all 3 seasons of it recently. Scotty Cameron, if I had to pick the best season 3 for a show, it would be Hannibal season 3. I know this was an answer I gave on a previous question of the week, but heck, that 3rd season really knocked it out of the park. It really cemented Hugh Dancy as the best Will Graham, paired with Mads Mikkelsen as Hannibal Lecter. Richard Armitage was an amazing Francis Dollarhide, the Red Dragon. It's still memorable to this day. Joe Anderson makes Mason Verger a more interesting villain than he ever was in the novels. Okay, I told Scotty this privately, but that's a show I regretfully have not watched any of, and maybe at some point in the summers, that's typically when I can catch up on TV I haven't seen. Maybe I'll give it a chance. I haven't watched it yet, but I'm not going to guarantee I'm going to do that. Crazy Maniac 40 says Buffy. I've not seen a second of that, so I have no input on it whatsoever. Sorry for that, Crazy Maniac, but I'm glad you loved the 3rd season of the show. Brooklyn_Wesley says Parks and Recreation. That is a very good show, and I don't think I remember season 3. It was a COVID show for me where I watched all of it, so I would never be able to tell you what specifically happens in season 3 of that. And then we had another thing from Scotty Cameron, and Scotty, I love you for these so much. Please don't ever change. Reacher season 3 reaches its finale just in time because I got the Persuader novel as a birthday gift, so I can read that when I'm after finishing The Enemy. My answer is on Spotify. Yep, I did read that. However, I do have a question for Kyle. I'm curious what Kyle considers the best show based on a novel or series of novels. My answer to that still stands as Hannibal. Reacher could surpass Hannibal depending on how well the fourth season is done, especially if Nick Santora with Amazon MGM Studios, Paramount, all the people involved, decide to adapt, die trying for the fourth season. Game of Thrones dropped the ball way too hard with its last 2 seasons that I can't, in good conscience, consider it. Jack Ryan is an okay show. Jack Ryan also didn't really adapt any of the novels, it just used the characters, like Jack Ryan, Kathy Ryan, James Greer, and Domingo Chavez. Some events were inspired by things from the novels, but the overall stories don't really match any of the novels. I understand the first 2 seasons of Hannibal were sort of like this. However, the first 2 seasons actually expanded plot threads and characters from Red Dragon that were part of the novel's exposition, like Garrett Jacob Hobbs. Both film adaptations of Red Dragon, Manhunter, and Red Dragon just give Hobbs a passing mention. Hopefully this wasn't too long. I did catch and prevent myself from getting too carried away when discussing the Garrett Jacob Hobbs plot thread. Okay, I gotta read this question again. Sorry, Scotty. What do I consider the best show based on a novel or series of novels? That's a really interesting thing. Now, my brain automatically goes to comics, and that's, Scotty, I think you would appreciate this. Over the last couple months, I've really been getting back into Daredevil comics. I'd read some of them, but by the time I was on Comic Book Nation, shout out to those guys and gal, I love those people, that I had finally I had finally completed my read of Charles Soule's run, which all of those, not all, but a significant amount of those elements have been brought over to the show. Hey, Marvel Comics, it would be a great opportunity for you to reprint the comics that inspired the show that you are now making millions of dollars off of, because you can't buy this comic officially because it's not in print anymore. The Chip Zdarsky ones are, which is great. Devil's Reign is awesome, but I would like to officially support these and have them physically, because who knows how this is all going to work with digital comics. Maybe one day you'll just close the library and we won't have access to them anymore. Sorry, I'm going to get rid of that tangent. Favorite series of novels or novels that is turned into a TV show? This is a very difficult question because I know a lot of books do get made into TV. It's kind of the biggest thing that's happening right now. Oh, Scotty, I got to think about this, and I'm trying to think off the fly really quickly. This is probably going to be controversial. The thing is I haven't read a ton of books that have been adapted. I've never read Lord of the Rings. I've tried. I've never read Game of Thrones. I read a lot more comic books than I do actual books. Is it cheating to say Watchmen? Because the Watchmen HBO series was absolutely incredible, but also Dexter's early run. Now, the run to the Trinity Killer is just absolutely incredible. So I'm really torn with that right now, Scotty. As of now, it's a graphic novel, so I'm gonna say the Watchmen right now. Damien Lindelof's Watchmen is my favorite graphic novel that's been turned into a TV series. Now, it was 1 season, and I understand that. I know there's people who probably love like his Dark Materials and stuff, you know, the Golden Compass and whatnot. So I do love the early seasons of Dexter's, and Game of Thrones is another instance where people are really sour on the ending of that. So yeah, I'm gonna go with Watchmen for now. So thank you so much. And Scotty, this is another example of what I love so much about our listener base. If you don't have an answer, you don't have to submit one, but I love hearing what the listeners want to know about me. I feel very grateful that people have a curiosity to get to know me a little bit more. So I appreciate that. Thank you so much for that, Scotty. This week's question of the week is, what is your favorite video game that has not been adapted to a live action film, or not even live action? Let's reword that. What is your favorite video game that hasn't been adapted to TV or a film? Obviously, this is in reference to next week's episode of the podcast will be a review of the Minecraft film, so buckle up for that. I can say that I have spoken to some people who have seen it already, and they surprisingly enjoyed it, which is much more optimistic than I thought I would be going into that. So that will be what the review for next week is. So let's reword that again, because I know I've probably said this twice already and it didn't really make sense. What's your favorite video game that hasn't been adapted to TV or films yet. To let me know, you can email the podcast, filmreelistspodcast at gmail.com, or you can comment directly on Spotify or YouTube, or make sure to @filmrealists on whatever social media platform and include the hashtag QOTW. If this is your first time listening to the show, thank you so much. I appreciate any listens that we do get. If you haven't yet, make sure to follow on your preferred podcast platform and leave a 5-star review. It would be absolutely incredible. It helps the show grow and will allow me opportunities that will give me the chance to provide further content and insights to our lovely listener and watcher base. So thank you so much to everybody who likes spending their 30 to 40 minutes with me every week. I greatly appreciate it, and I hope to see you next week. My name is Kyle Naranya, and I will see you next time.